So it is exactly 3 minutes past 6 p.m. and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this first ever CCSF seminar. I'm Robin Mansell and I'm the chair of the CCSF, and I want to extend a huge welcome to all of you who have joined us, friends of CCSF, donors, some students, and not the least, our three speakers, each of whom is either a former or a current recipient of a CCSF scholarship. As you all know, our theme tonight is how algorithms and data are used to influence you. And this is, I think, a timely topic, especially since we all know that data is swirling around, especially in the light of the pandemic, and in the health sector, data is particularly important. And that raises all sorts of issues for individuals, but also for policymakers and for businesses. And we will hear some different views on that tonight. Our speakers are going to be introduced to you by Michelle Sahai, who is a CCSF committee member. And she has done most of the running in terms of organizing this seminar. So a huge thank you to her. And we are very hopeful the technology will work with us tonight. And what I would like to say to you is that there is a chat button. I'm sure most of you are familiar now with Zoom. The chat button is there for you to think of questions. If you have comments or questions, please do put something in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that while Michelle is moderating. And then hopefully we'll have some time for a Q&A towards the end. So without more from me, I simply welcome you. I'm so pleased to see you. And I'm going to turn over to Michelle now, who will take us on. Michelle.
Yes, thank you, Robin. Really nice introduction. So my job for the rest of the time is really to introduce our three speakers. And we'll start with Gillian Brooks. Gillian is an assistant professor in marketing at King's College London since 2020. She completed a postdoc at the Said Business School at University of Oxford, and she was a CCSF scholar in the 2011-2012 academic year, where she completed her PhD in sociology at the University of Cambridge. She investigates topics in branding, consumer culture, marketing strategy, and social media, and has published in the Journal of Marketing, Forbes, The Guardian, The Telegraph, The Times, and Newsweek. She's also a recipient of the American Marketing Association, the Don Layman Research Award. So we'll welcome Gillian to speak about her topic, which is posting for profit, how social media influencers influence you. So Gillian, if you don't mind, you can share.
Sure, I'll share my screen here.
Yeah.
Can people see that? You never know until halfway through.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Robin and Michelle as well for organizing this. It's a really great event to get everyone together. We've sort of previously been part of CCSF and current ones as well. I'm going to just be a bit of a disclaimer. I'm an ethnographer, so this is a qualitative data analysis of big data. So just as a heads up, there won't be too many algorithms or machine learning for anyone who's currently watching. So posting for profit, how social media influencers influence you. This is based on a paper currently at the Journal of Advertising that's almost through the revision phase. And it's really looking at how the influencer marketing landscape has really evolved over the last few years. So previously we would have, for those unfamiliar with sort of the marketing literature, previously you would have brands who would influence consumers. That's sort of a very easy way of looking at it. Then we had influencers, of course, who would come in and start influencing consumers by promoting different products, talking about sponsored content, and really trying to reshape the customer journey. Then consumers started asking influencers for help. So they would ask for different tutorials on how to do a variety of DIY work at home or cosmetic recommendations, things along those lines. And then brands thought, well, wait a minute, we can get involved as well. So why don't we make sure that the influencer is discussing our specific brand instead of someone else's? And then influencers themselves actually ended up becoming their own brands, and often many of them have actually put out their own product under their own line and really have sort of changed this landscape. So for those of you who aren't familiar with influencers, which might be many people, I'm just going to introduce you to sort of a pioneer here of influencers. This is Michelle Phan, and she actually started in 2003 just having a very basic blog online. There was no video at the time. She wasn't a trained makeup artist. She wanted to make that very clear in our interview, but she really just talked a lot about how she did her makeup, right? Very, very simple. However, two girls actually commented and said, well, why don't you show us how you do your makeup? And so she made a video just talking basically to herself essentially, and those two followers. And within the first week, the video had garnered over 40,000 views. So again, this is sort of showing in 2007 that there's clearly a gap within this landscape that hadn't really been addressed by either brand or company. Interestingly, though, in 2010, she continued to sort of do these videos, but she started tagging very strategically specific brands that she was using. And so she also decided that Lancome might actually be a good brand to tag. And as a result, the vice president of PR at Lancome reached out to her and saw that her video had 500,000 views compared to just 500 on their own platform. And my favorite part about this is she had actually applied for a job at a Lancome counter and had been denied the job. They said that she didn't have enough experience, but clearly, you know, with these videos and her reaching out to consumers on their own level, she's addressing a gap that was previously ignored. She then launched her own sort of subscription makeup box called Ipsy. She did a collaboration with L'Oreal, and in 2018, she was worth over $50 million. So the reason I'm showing this sort of continuum here is really illustrating how from a recommendation, addressing a recommendation from two viewers, she really sort of accelerated and became sort of a key leader within this space. So nowadays, advertisers sort of spend $1.6 billion on influencers, predominantly on Instagram. They're a great way to help work around any ad blockers that consumers put up and really try to make sense of how to get in the heads of the consumer on their own terms. So this also is not happening just in the makeup space. This is Ryan's Toys. He has over 16 million subscribers on YouTube. I see Michelle nodding her head, maybe a fan of Ryan's here, but Ryan earned $11 million in 2017. So just, you know, this is not just happening within consumer good, makeup goods, sorry. We also have the Bucket List family. They have 1.2 million followers on Instagram, and they earn over $31,000 per post. This is a family that quit their job, the husband and wife quit their jobs, and they're traveling around the world with their 3 kids and clearly making some good money while they're at it. But of course, we all know that these people are getting paid to sell us things. This isn't anything new, but yet this is something that not a lot of scholars have actually addressed. So here we have Jessie Cruikshank, who's an influencer, a Canadian influencer, and she's posting about Johnson & Johnson. So she put this on Instagram and she wrote, "I'm just a mom standing in front of a bath asking it to not be stressful." And then she plugs the product. Okay, some of the comments include, "Oh, come on, Johnson & Johnson," or "sell out." So again, people they understand that this is clearly happening, and yet we're still willing to give them the time of day or even engage with these influencers. Similarly, another example from Johnson & Johnson, Whitney Port saying, "I partnered with Johnson's Baby because I love their new Cotton Touch newborn wash shampoo," etc. Comments, "I have to say I'm really sad to see this collab. You've sold out. Partner with them because you love their products. The public isn't stupid. You partner with them because they're paying you." Again, there's clearly this tension where these individuals are using this to make money. This is how they earn a living, and yet, you know, the joke is on them because we know really what's happening here. Another one, Bethany Moda, talking about a new video up on her YouTube channel today. People are a little bit harsher with the comments towards Bethany. You only upload when you need money, and then you take a 5-month break. She doesn't even care about her fans anymore. So unbelievable. So you're noticing people actually get quite invested in these individuals, and they get very angry when they do realize that they're being sort of duped into buying specific products or even being provided with sponsored content. So this led to our research question: how can influencers be commercial without actually looking commercial? And so the methodology conducted was, we did a qualitative sort of ethnography of 15 months of data collection. And this included interviewing individuals who were sort of elite online influencers: Michelle Phan, Juicy Star, and Chriselle Lim. We also talked to a variety of talent agencies in Los Angeles. So these are individuals who represent Angelina Jolie, Ben Affleck, but also have a YouTube management division as well. We then talked to PR firms who are sort of this intermediary between both brand and influencer, and they helped these collaborations take place. And then we spoke to brands. Now you'll notice here the numbers different than the number of people written up top. These are the ones who let us use their names. Everyone else wanted to be anonymous. So we spent time in Cincinnati with P&G trying to figure out how they choose influencers, why they choose certain influencers, and how that relationship really does develop. We coded all of the interviews into initial categories and then came up with reappearing themes that kept being identified within the data. As a result, we developed a typology of influence based on this data collection. And as one influencer agent said, at the end of the day, if you look at influencers, their audiences are an extremely important asset that they cannot lose by diluting their brand and becoming too promotional and losing their own voice. There are many kinds of risks in potentially trying to take something that started organic and turning it into commercial property. So this notion of commercialism and profit kept reappearing in our interviews. And so we sort of realized there is something here in terms of how individuals genuinely try to make money online, even though we know they're getting paid to tell us what to buy. And this led to how influencers appear non-commercial to their audience based only on the data that we've collected. I want to make sure that's quite clear. So the CAST framework refers to curation, authenticity, spontaneity, and tutor. And so for the sake of time, I'm just going to go very briefly over some of these examples. So the first one is curation. So influencers deliberately use a mix of brands. They are fairly brand agnostic. They don't stay sort of to one sponsorship, if you will. They want to make sure that they're showing extensive comparisons of various products in use. This is often illustrated through a shelfie, they call it, which is sort of a photograph of the products that they use. Again, the individuals that we interviewed were predominantly in the beauty space, which is why many of these are focused more on beauty and cosmetics. The focus, obviously, as a result of being brand agnostic, moves away from the brand and actually onto the influencer. And then the influencer themselves become that specific brand. So as one PR agent told us, they're so close to the masses because they don't exist without their audience. These girls, they really create their own brand. This is their persona. This is who they are, and it's attached, really attached to who they are. To their personality. So I think that what we're seeing with brands is that they're realizing that people don't trust advertising anymore, right? We all know what product placement is like. We know what sponsor content looks like, but yet there's something still about these individuals that we believe in and trust. The next part of the mechanism of the CAST framework is authenticity. The majority of the successful influencers that we spoke with are very honest about their partnerships. As one said, I definitely said that one of the reasons that our viewers listen to us, and I've always been honest, is there have been so many paid deals that I've turned down just because I don't like the product or I don't like what the brand stands for. And I've always been really honest with how I feel about the products. And I think they know if they purchase something that I'm raving about, it's going to be the exact thing I'm speaking about. They stick to their roots. They talk a lot about sort of how they've grown their number of followers, and they're very appreciative of their fans. They talk about how it's like meeting new friends and talking to them in sort of more of an authentic and intimate way. And as one influencer talent agent said, we work with a few beauty influencers that only focused on green products, for example. So no matter how much money you're going to pay them, they just won't do it because they have standards. I think it's a healthy kind of development that makes those collaborations really authentic. So if you're a green influencer and someone offers you a non-green product, you're not going to just jump on it because you think it'll, make you more money. You're going to, as a result, lose some of your followers, which would be devastating in terms of the currency that exists within this landscape. They also predominantly broadcast from their bedroom or their bathroom, this sort of DIY aesthetic, showing that they're friends, they're just like you. And of course, they also have to actually give you a bit of a heads up if lots of sponsored content is coming your way. So as Lemon Stripes here on the left said, also have a good amount of sponsored content coming down the pipe. It's my busy season, but please bear with me. All the brands I'm working with are the ones that I believe in. And then others actually who just want to talk about the product they like, they actually feel that they have to say this is not an ad or this is not sponsored, and sort of talk about their love of the brand from a different perspective. Spontaneity, an example of spontaneity is this notion of hauls. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with them, but they are referred to as PG porn for the millennial generation. And it actually developed during the recession, where influencers would go and shop for a bunch of stuff at Zara or H&M or Boots, and they'd come home and take them out of the bag and sort of show individuals what they bought. Seems really trivial. We just have to remember who the audience is here. But if you're Sephora or H&M or Bath & Body Works, you want to make sure that you are on these haul videos. So as Blair Fowler said in one of our interviews, I think I was the first person to have recorded haul videos with so many views. I went to Forever 21 and had so much stuff that I almost needed a truck to haul it back, hence the term haul. They also provide often behind the curtain moments, and they really do normalize taboo subjects that haven't previously been appearing online. Again, increasing that sort of sense of intimacy really with their followers. They surprise audiences with unexpected content that often resonates with them. A woman who did this is Jillian Harris, showing herself postpartum, which was an image that people either loved or hated, depending on which side they were on, but again, something that we hadn't really seen previously. Blair Fowler talked about her second nose job, again, admitting to having had more than one, but still talking about the recovery process. Again, being completely transparent and sort of showing that behind the curtain moment. And finally, the last element of the CAST framework is this notion of tutor. They provide tutorials on how to actually use products, not just listing product features. So the internet has opened up a two-way dialogue. So now, instead of having this authoritative figure telling you to buy this product, you have a community that tells you what products work best for them. And the influencers step in and they provide this audience with information that they know is valuable. So many people actually want to see how a product performs, as opposed to just reading a long list of characteristics. So for example, here's just an example of Bobbi Brown listing the products, listing how you do it. But at the end of the day, the consumer generally just wants to know how it works, how you put it on. And it's that tutor element really that the influencers are providing in this space. And finally, what they do is they talk to you, they find out what you want to do, and then they go out and do an investigation on their own. They listen and they respond to audience requests. And as one influencer agency representative stated, the minute you start to think, I'm going to do what I want to do and not engage with your audience, you're on a losing path. You have to be in constant conversation with the audience, ask questions of them, and respond authentically, recognizing the nuances of the different parts of the audience. So this is a mommy blogger who wrote down, thanks for following along. What other stores do you want to see for our budget-friendly faves? So again, making sure that the audience and the consumers, the followers, feel that they're being heard, which oftentimes that is a significant gap that brands really can't fill. And as one said, most of my ideas for my videos will start with a request from the audience. Almost everyone has some products that they love, so I'll use those, but I'll also throw in ones that I like, and this really helps me bond with the viewers. So to conclude, I just want to highlight some sort of key takeaways, both from academic and managerial perspectives, for those of you who might engage with influencers in some capacity. So traditional methods of promotion are evolving in an environment where the consumer, as I hopefully showed with that chart at the very beginning, is really reclaiming their position and seeking information about a given product on their own terms. We no longer want information broadcasted at us. We want information to come in a space where we already are thriving and existing in, and then of course decide whether we want to use that branded product or not. However, for practitioners, that can be really scary, and engaging with online influencers is an unbelievably uncontrolled experience. Just think about handing your brand to a hormonal 15-year-old, right? There's going to be some risk there, but clearly it's something that a lot of these companies feel they should do. It's also important though that influencers, brands and corporations understand that influencers have their own brand to manage as well. They need to resonate with their audience in order to have influence over them. And this is very different from what marketing executives have been used to. So the skills that were effective in traditional marketing campaigns, so this includes tight execution, scripting, consistent messaging, they actually might work against brands in this era where the influencer's voice is king. It won't let me change, but that's the last slide. It just had my name on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Technical problems.
I mean, that's the story of 2021.
I know. Do you have any questions from the audience for Jillian? I'm looking to see. I can't see anything. Well, while we're waiting, how about just generally a fantastic talk. So, I mean, I'm understanding that audience seem to be more receptive of social media influences than celebrities. Is that correct? So this was I guess the olden days. What's olden days? A couple years ago, before social media became a big thing. What sort of social media platforms do you think are the most useful for influencers?
Well, it depends on the industry the influencer's in. So if you're in, fast moving consumer goods, Instagram is usually the best just because there's that visual element. But if you're maybe in finance or mining, sort of Twitter would likely be better because people are going there for more information and sort of news, 140 characters worth of news as opposed to actual visual depiction. So I would say it depends on where the influencer is in terms of what industry they're trying to influence.
Okay, so it's really dependent on that. Now, I mean, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm not on TikTok. I don't even know how to use that, but I know that social media also has a reputation for social media influencers having a bad brand reputation. So I'll just ask one last question before we go on to the next. Is at worst, can those influencers harm a brand if they promoted some harmful product?
Oh, completely. Absolutely. I think that's the risk that a lot of companies are having. They know they have to engage with influencers to get to their followers, but is that worth the risk using that influencer as a conduit to their followers? So I think absolutely there can be major reputational issues with hiring an influencer who is off-brand, who goes rogue, or who might be in it more for their brand than yours.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jillian. So we'll move on to Zoe, and thank you for taking us on this conversation and discussion. And so we'll just ask you to stop share and have Zoe share her screen.
Okay, can you see?
Yes.
And
I think, yeah. So I think you could share it. Okay, thank you very much. So so now we have Zoe Sujon, and she's a program director for the Communications and Media program at London College of Communication, University of Arts London. So Zoe was a CCSF Scholar in the 2004-2005 academic year, while she was completing her PhD on citizenship and participatory media at LSE in 2010. She was a senior lecturer at Regent's University London, 2010 to 2018, and a fellow and lecturer at the Department of Media and Communications, 2003 to 2010, which is the London School of Economics and Political Science. So Zoe's going to speak to us today about I Super Like You, algorithmic connectivity on social apps, which is the relationship between new technologies and social life, algorithm cultures, and digital features. Okay, thank you, Zoe.
marvelous. Thank you so much, Michelle, and also to Robin, to both of you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here, particularly as a former CCF scholar. So wonderful to participate, and also great to meet the co-panelists and learn about their research as well. So just as a bit of context about this research, this largely comes from one of the last chapters in my forthcoming book. I think it's coming out next month. April 24th. And so the last chapter sort of looks at love and how that relates to social media. The book itself is called The Social Media Age, and is really about how social media are not only historically grounded, but part of longer economic and social trajectories, as well as sort of really critically analyzing what is unique about them and how it is that they work. So in this presentation, what I'd like to do is just really sort of think about what it is that love and algorithmic connectivity means. I think that it's probably important to contextualize that this is more of an overview of the literature, and really aiming to look at what's unique about not just dating apps, but social apps. One of the things that I think I have found is that there's huge commonality between the logic of how it is that social media and social technologies function, as well as many of the new dating apps and social apps. So I've chosen to term them as social apps. So drawing from the sociology of love, I want to understand how it is that algorithms work in terms of how we connect with each other. One of the things that you see a lot in the media and popular discourses about things like Tinder and other dating apps is that we are now in an age of hookup culture. People are using social technologies to connect for instant gratification, and this results in a kind of demise of the depth of social and personal and intimate relationships that we might otherwise have. Interestingly, when you look at some of the work on love that's been done by Eva Illouz and Zygmunt Bauman, this is not necessarily related particularly to dating apps or social apps. There's many other broader social consequences and social conditions which influence our social relations. So drawing from this sort of literature, I want to look at social apps and particularly datification and how it is that algorithms work in those processes of datification to really understand what increasingly seems to be the ideology of connection, which drives algorithmic connectivity and the sort of platform work of apps. So what I would say that I conclude is that dating apps and social apps may expand your networks, whether those are for dating or for other kinds of social connection, but they're also key in the datification of social relations. So turning to the sociology of love, I think one of the first starting points is that there's actually many, many, many different kinds of intimacy and personal connection, and romantic love and dating and sort of sexual intimacy are only a very small part of that. Other researchers have identified eros as erotic love, storge, which is affection, philia, friendship, and is about the many different kinds of affinities we might have, and also agape, which is Latin, I believe, for the greater good. It could also be spiritual love, but I think it's important to remember that these are other aspects which are of which romantic and erotic love are only a very small part. And I think one of the other key things, drawing from Eva Illouz, is that we may experience love and intimacy as very individual things. And I think this is, all of these different kinds of love, but really they're actually embedded within socioeconomic systems. For example, marriage has got economic roots about bringing in together different family estates. So it's actually about maximizing wealth and status as opposed to individual passions. Illouz also argues, and I think that this is quite interesting, that, at the turn of the century, romantic love was also really about a break with some of the economic logics of marriage, so that there was a sort of experience of a romantic interiority, which was based on an individual pursuit of connection as opposed to marrying estates. And I think that's a really interesting point, because I think the point about how we experience our interiority, as Illouz calls it, in relation to the socioeconomics of our capitalist system is really key. And I think that there's something perhaps arguably similar in terms of that tension between what we experience as personal and individual and what is actually grounded within socioeconomic relations. So Illouz comes up with the idea of hyperconnective modernity. And I think perhaps in contrast to Zygmunt Bauman, who talks about liquid love as one part of a much more liquid and fluid sort of modern life, is that hyperconnective modernity is actually based on sort of a decline of social relations and negative kinds of connections. For example, she uses the term zipless, pardon my language, the zipless fuck, and she's just talking about what we would relate to hookup culture and a decline of social relations. Whereas Zygmunt Bauman talks about a shift from relationships which are primarily bound by traditional obligations of courtship or relational commitments, and instead are about momentary network connections. So for me, these are really interesting framings which broadly address how it is that love is shifting within our current moment. In the 21st century. And yet these configurations also fit with ongoing debates about how technologies are linked to the decline or amplification of social capital, and there's a huge debate around that, I think. More recently, we've got Sherry Turkle, who says that technologies replace our human connections and we're losing the capacity to be able to speak in intimate ways, not only to ourselves, but to those who matter to us. On other sides of it, there are people who argue that we have so many more connections, such a broadening of our social pools, that this is going to increase and broaden our social capital. Yeah. And then there's people like Zizi Papakarizi who argue that technology is never, and algorithms are never going to be able to shape love in the true experience of that, because algorithms can't find love through database profiles, and platforms can't fix that. So there's this, you know, complex sort of conceptual terrain to think about what it is that social apps and dating apps mean for how it is that we connect in intimate ways to others. So just briefly, I just thought it worth defining what we mean by social media and social apps, because this is a huge territory. And I think that there's been lots of debates as well about how to define them. Myself, I find the work to define what it is that social technologies are can be a little counterproductive, because it's a rapidly shifting ground. So some of the characteristics I think that are important is that the public aim is to connect, meet, chat, share, you know, social words and social aims, yet underneath that public language are also very sophisticated processes to collect and monetize data. And so they may engage in all sorts of different ways. Network technologies, incorporate user-generated content, engage platform sociality. They're public and interactive, but they also have these complex systems intended to monetize and datify social life. So the other component of this, and this has come up, I think, looking at social platforms, is that there's a seamless nature. And this is the same, I think, with a lot of dating apps. You know, there's Facebook dating, which was launched in 2018, I think in 2019 in the UK. And this is a part of Facebook specifically dedicated to dating. Yet, I think the majority of people who do use social networks for dating actually use Facebook, not Facebook dating, but just Facebook. This is something that's come up in socially conservative countries. And in part that might be because it's less stigmatized. But what this means is that it can be really hard to put a boundary around what it is that you're looking at in terms of dating and the ways in which people seek out each other through social apps. Yet, even when you look at Facebook, there might be the appearance of a seemingly infinite stream of connections. Yet even Facebook is something that can be hard to put boundaries on, because it's something that sits and extends across the top of the web through many different sites, and also ends up providing physical infrastructures through, you know, undersea data cables and all of these other complex parts of the network. So literally, they are frictionless sites which aim to obscure the places where they start and end. And that's something that I think makes it much more difficult to understand how it is that social apps work in intimate relationships. Intimacy is also something that can be appear to be seamless and can be difficult to put edges around. I suppose it's important to say that within social media, and there's, you know, apps can exist within social media, apps can exist within apps, and these can create data funnels, which you might see through social widgets like the like button. And what this does is put essentially a wall around how it is that data is collected. So it creates a walled garden. So it might seem infinite, it might seem seamless, it might seem like it stretches across and through both physical and social networks, yet there's a very different story happening when it comes to how it is that data is collected. In terms of dating apps, we also get an increasingly complex market, even though there's probably two major players, Interactive Core and Matchgroup.com. Yet you also get the growth of very niche kinds of apps, which you might see if you look at some of the religious apps in the right-hand side, or astrological apps. You know, there's all sorts emerging, you know, to cater to very, very niche interests. One, for example, is called Bristler, which is for people who have beards and for people who like beards. And it's a really interesting example, I think, because it tries to avoid any gender binary, which is interesting because the people who use that would negotiate their interactions in very different ways from those that might be more traditionally gendered. Anyway, this is just a illustration of the sort of some of the variety that we have in terms of dating apps. And I think, if you look at what happens in terms of data sharing, and the reason why this is important is because, on the surface, you have this focus on sociality, on connection, on intimacy, but actually what happens under the surface is really about data collection and datafication and monetization of that. And there's some very questionable, at best, that's probably a very polite way of putting it, data sharing practices. So here's some examples. So in Grindr, in 2018, Grindr was caught sharing users' HIV statuses with third parties. Tinder and OkCupid have also been caught sharing user data based on political views, demographics, location, with customer engagement companies. So this is like quite blatant monetization. Tinder, and this is in their terms and conditions, shares data with all other match group businesses, as well as other partners, which is fairly typical of most social media policies. And they've also had, I think up until 2019, privileged access. They've been whitelisted by Facebook. So they've had privileged access to Facebook data, which just completely amplifies what they can do with that data. And then they also have something called double authentication, which is when they first started Tinder and Facebook, you had to have a Facebook account to open Tinder, and this was considered a double authentication service. They also practice something called collaborative filtering and draw a lot from data given. I'll come into that into a minute. But one of the things that I think is really important is that in terms of data sharing, it's not just with Tinder users or dating app users, it's with non-users as well. And this is something that has been observed in the creation of shadow profiles. So on Facebook, and this is standard practice, this encapsulates the logic, I think, behind many social media technologies. You have users who give data to social media companies, and they're called disclosing users. But when they join a social media platform or agree to the terms and conditions, they might share their contacts, they might share their photos, they might share all sorts of other kinds of data about non-users, and social media platforms and dating apps collect that data. And this is what they collect it so that they can be able to provide services to people, such as, recommend people. This is something people you may know do. This is something done in the Discover features on, Instagram and other social media. It's also about making recommendations. And for dating apps and dating features, this includes geolocation. So geolocation is used to scrape data not only about disclosing users, but non-disclosing users, user set filters. They also provide considerable information about their interests and demographics. And I think what we've seen just by looking at Tinder, which is, a kind of economic business model and logic defining app within the dating space, that you see a shift from moving from Facebook likes, which was one of the ways in which users were matched on Tinder, to collaborative filters. And what collaborative filters means is it's a process where user-to-user recommendations are mimicked. So it's almost like lookalike audiences. So if one person likes one kind of music, and that person shares, is matched with another person, those kinds of music are then mimicked in terms of developing matches and profiles for that user. So it's an interesting way in which algorithms are set to use. Algorithms are set to datify social relations. And this is also used to make predictive recommendations. And of course, data is gathered from other users and the ways in which other users use other apps and other sites, and this is also used to match. So if you use, Spotify, likes can be linked, and that can help in terms of how you are algorithmically matched with other users. So what this means is, I think that what we're seeing is something that I would refer to as algorithmic connectivity. And this is built on what I and others have called an ideology of connection. And you can see this in a very pro-social language of connection. Tanya Boucher talks about program sociality, which is the ways in which features of social media are actually designed to keep you on site, and then the time you're on site can be monetized. So it's less about what you're doing and how you're doing it, but just literally how long you're there. And I think that Boucher's point really shows that profitability in connectivity can be positive or negative. So abusive and misogynistic content on Tinder, for example, or on Facebook or Reddit or all these other sites are as profitable as positive content. And there's a very interesting area of work which looks at the ways in which defriending, detoxing, breaking up, disconnecting on social media, and even perhaps those on dating apps requires intentional labor, and you have to work almost to break that logic of connection.
So you're nearly out of time.
All right, okay, this is my second last slide, and I just wanted to mention briefly super likes, because they're something that are promoted by Tinder as a way to boost your visibility. And I think that what you also see with super likes is that Tinder does something called match strangling, where they limit how many connections, how many matches someone might have, so that people will be able to pay in a subscription-based way to connect with others. And this is something that has actually also become a common feature across dating apps. So to conclude, when we talk about algorithmic connectivity, I think some of the things that we see is there is a certain rewriting of dating connections. Ileana Gershon talks about media switching, the ways in which people make connections on some media and then switch to others, so that people might meet on Tinder, but then might move to Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. So in that sense, there's a very seamless nature, and it's very difficult to look at one app or one site to understand the ways in which algorithmic connectivity works, or how it is that personal and social and intimate relations are impacted, because it's a nested, deeply networked context. How it is that people visibly express connection, I think, changes depending on age and platform use. Snapchat streaks are a very interesting one. And I think that one of the things that we can see an expansion of dating pools and friendship networks, and also a obscuring of what it is that intimacy might mean within this hyper-connected modernity. I'd argue also that super likes are super data channels, which help promote apps for specific kinds of connection. And lastly, social relations are increasingly mediatized, increasingly datafied for monetization of these social apps. So not just of these social apps, but of social relations. So there we go. That's my view of what it is that algorithmic connectivity is in relation to dating and social apps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. So just because I'm looking at the time, I think we'll move over to Thomas just now, and then we'll move to questions after him. So to introduce Thomas VOGL, he's a doctoral student at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, where he is researching public sector organizational memory in the digital age. He's interested in public administration, organizational studies, and digital change. Thomas was actually awarded the CCSF Scholarship in the 2020-2021 academic year. Previously, he worked in the Ontario Public Service on policy related to child welfare, corporate finance, and child and youth mental health. He was awarded the National Student Award by the Canadian Association of Programs in Public Administration in 2011. So we'll have Thomas share his screen, where he'll talk to us about unintended consequences of algorithms and data in the workplace. Okay, thank you. Let me know if you can.
Let me know if that's come up.
That's good. All right, thanks, Thomas. You take it away.
Okay, great. Michelle, thanks for the introduction. And I guess I'd like to start here with just a brief mention of what we've heard so far about shifting relationships, different worlds, friction in design, and the limitations of algorithms and data in the way that we try to understand or influence each other. So I'm going to be extending this discussion, but I'll be doing so from the perspective of algorithms and data in the workplace. And specifically, I'm going to be drawing on an example of recent information technology change in Ontario's child welfare sector. So this presentation is broken into 5 parts. I'll set out the argument, provide some historical and contemporary context for this technological change in the workplace, present some differing worldviews on the 2 key groups engaged in this change, which in this case are managers and social workers, and illustrate some of the consequences for child protection practice from my doctoral research. I'll conclude with some key takeaways. And because this is doctoral research, the analysis and the research itself is still to a certain extent in progress. So the argument goes roughly as follows. Algorithms and data are used in the workplace to influence staff, but sometimes they have unintended consequences. Different functional groups in organizations, like managers and frontline staff, can misunderstand one another's worldviews. And those misunderstandings can become embedded in technology, especially in cases where the technology is designed or developed by one group. Finally, if the priorities of one group are privileged, there may be unintended influences that undermine the expected benefits of a technology for all the groups involved. So part of this story begins in the late 19th century with the development of scientific management, a theory focused on making work processes legible to managers so that labor productivity could be optimized. This work wasn't necessarily about replacing people with robots, as in the illustration here, but the managerial focus did tend to make labor's work more robot-like relative to organizational objectives and performance measures. With the growing ubiquity of computing in the late 20th century, scientific management gained a new set of tools. Work processes could be programmed into computer code, data about productivity could be more easily measured, and many aspects of work activity could be turned into data for immediate or later analysis. Zuboff, in her 1988 book, In the Age of the Smart Machine, suggested that there were 2 ways that these changes could go. Either exclusively automation, where the worker's role is reduced to data entry or rubber stamping, or through what Zuboff referred to as informating, which is making work more legible, not only to the management, but to the workers themselves, so that they can identify areas for improvement and enhance their capacity to make meaningful contributions to the organization. As illustrated by the before and after picture here, drawn by a stock and bond transfer assistant, Zuboff's research found that most work was merely automated and led to worker de-skilling, despite management pronouncements that the technology would free up worker time for problem solving and finding innovative ways to improve business activities from the bottom up. Another major advance was the development of the internet, because it allowed for the real-time sharing of information across geographically distributed units. This type of change was particularly relevant in Ontario's child welfare sector because it's delivered by 50 independent children's aid societies and Indigenous child and family well-being agencies. And while there have been calls to implement a single information system in Ontario's child welfare system since 1997, this goal was not achieved until 2019, when all non-Indigenous agencies were on the Child Protection Information Network, or CPIN. And I'll be referring to it as CPIN from now on. So prior to CPIN, each agency had its own independent information system that was customized to meet its local needs and that was fragmented from the information systems of other agencies. CPIN for the first time linked information horizontally between agencies so that social workers could share files, and vertically with the ministry so that administrators could carry out oversight. My doctoral research in Ontario on the CPIN project was conducted between July 2018 and September 2020. To bring the connection between the historical context and the current case into clearer focus, I have provided these 2 quotes. While they're from different sectors and are separated by 30 years, the sentiments are similar. Management information systems can formalize processes in a way that limit a frontline worker's ability to deal with complexity, highlighting a potential conflict between the worldviews of the administrators responsible for the development of the information system and the frontline workers who use it. The next part of the presentation looks at 2 different worldviews in the child protection sector. That of public sector managers, who are responsible for the design, development, and deployment of CPIN, and social workers, who were one of the intended user groups of this information system. Starting with public sector managers, this group is trying to achieve multiple objectives by means of information technology change: efficiency and economy, compliance and accountability, and improved outcomes. These objectives were reflected in some of the public communications about CPIN shown in this slide. In order to achieve managerial objectives of efficiency, compliance, and accountability, public administrators built data frames and tools into CPIN. Standards were built into the system, setting out what activities and assessments needed to be completed, as well as how frequently those activities needed to be carried out. Though I should note that some, both in Canada and the UK, have questioned the extent to which these standards are grounded in an evidence base. Standardized assessment tools were also built into the system. For example, rudimentary risk scoring algorithms, which is the central illustration on this slide. And then CPIN also allowed for reporting on both service performance indicators. One of 5 is shown here. But where the only measure out of these 5 of quality for clients is a self-report of the youth caregiver relationship. And there were also quality improvement plans, which look at the quantity of a service and whether services were completed within expected timeframes, but which are not yet publicly available. I should also note that much of the data in CPIN was not of a sufficiently high quality to allow for reporting. So the ministry had to, or had been relying on a data set collected by and maintained by the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto to meet its reporting requirements. The emphasis on compliance standards, risk assessment, and performance measurement that was designed into the system showed a focus on process over outcomes. Now, the second worldview is that of professional social workers. In contrast to the procedural focus of public sector managers, social workers are professionalized to combine theory with practice to achieve social justice aims and respond to the complex circumstances of their clients, which could sometimes bring their professional judgment into conflict with formal policies. In order to carry out their work, they need highly contextual and situational information about their clients, which may not be present in the data frames developed by public administrators. As with other professions, social workers are socialized by means of educational credentials, in this case facilitated by social work program accreditation through organizations like the Canadian Association for Social Work Education, and membership in and adherence to the Code of Ethics of a professional organization, for example, the Canadian Association of Social Workers. This professionalization equips them with different expectations about what information is important and what tools are useful in delivering services to people. Some scholars have suggested that these differences between public administrators and social workers are based on different forms of knowledge, and that information technology changes can privilege one form of knowledge over another. For example, the categorical logic of a database over the contextual narrative of a case file. So what are the consequences? This part of the presentation looks at those in an effort to, sort of in the context of this effort to improve information accessibility, reduce administrative burden, and enhance oversight. So in this first example, we see a conflict or gap between the knowledge held in risk assessment scores and the contextual and experientially based professional judgment of social workers. This example also illustrates how the risk assessment is privileged, and countering its assessment imposes additional administrative burden, threatening to undermine the expertise of the social worker. The above quotes from my fieldwork are intended to illustrate how CPIN, rather than reducing administrative burden, increased the amount of data entry expected of social workers. Carrying out street-level social work became secondary to formally recording those activities in the information system. Ostensibly, this would have a negative impact on clients through a reduction in interpersonal interaction, but there was no way to measure this type of impact under the then existing administrative framework. This next example is from my observational fieldwork, and it shows how the introduction of compliance metrics shifts workers' focus towards data outcomes. After attending the demo of business intelligence tool that highlighted a worker's caseload and important milestone deadlines, a worker came in suddenly and asked about a purple or non-compliant file. They were worried by the fact that it was not green or compliant because they wanted to be a green worker. This worker was specifically wondering how to get the late file out of the system. They had done the work, but it was showing late because they did not correctly complete the recording. Recording mistakes were common, as data entry had to be done in a very particular way. There are many ways that workers could make mistakes, and CPIN did not automatically flag those mistakes to the workers. This was one of the reasons why data for oversight was not readily available. The demo presenter went to assist the worker, but when they returned, they indicated that they were worried this worker would not do certain or would do certain tasks to satisfy the system, rather than doing those tasks to provide a good service to the clients. With staff having both access to monitoring tools and awareness of that their performance was transparent, there was an increased focus on compliance and away from professional expertise. The quotes above for my fieldwork build on the previous example, showing how emphasis was shifting from social work outcomes to data outcomes and from case recording to stats. In the case of CPIN implementation, it's unlikely that anyone intended to de-skill workers, reduce service time with families and children, shift the focus from professional expertise to compliance, or undermine accurate data recording. However, when one worldview is privileged in the realization of data frameworks and algorithmic tools, there may be unanticipated consequences when these technologies hit the ground. So the key takeaway is, while managers may intentionally put in place systems that attempt to improve efficiency, economy, and compliance with standards, a lack of attention to the worldviews of others in their sector may lead to unintended consequences. There may be misalignments between algorithms and data and the worldviews into which different groups are socialized. This misalignment can have three main impacts. It can divert focus of one group away from its goals. For example, achieving compliance standards rather than social justice objectives for families and children. It can prevent a group from learning and innovating, for example, by using algorithms and data to enable new ways of working. And third, it can undermine the objectives sought by the other group. For example, public administrators not getting usable data for oversight or outcome measurement. When we look at how algorithms and data influence us, it's not only important to look at the impact of their intended uses, but at the more subtle changes that they can generate. Otherwise, they may not achieve the desired outcomes. This suggests the need for engagement, collaboration, and testing to ensure that the assumptions and objectives are appropriate in the setting and align with the worldviews of different functional groups. Here's a list of citations that were directly or indirectly referenced in this presentation. And I know that we've gone a bit late, but I'll conclude here, and hopefully we'll have some time to answer questions.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you to all of our speakers. We are at 7 o'clock, and for those of you who need to leave, thank you so much for attending, but we can carry on a little bit longer as long as our three speakers are able to do so. We've had a couple of questions in the chat, and so I thought I would just first of all pose a question to each of you, and you can answer in turn if that's okay. So for Thomas, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on your hopes and expectations about whether or not improved designs that meet a wider variety of user interests, stakeholder interests is likely or not, or whether these systems will continue to be developed and misalign as you were describing. So that's my question for you. For Zoe, I was wondering when you were speaking, if you might just give a very basic definition of what does datafication mean? How, you know, in layperson's language, and why do we get worked up about it? So I was wondering if you could respond to that. And then for Jillian, this question comes from Barb Richards, who's in the audience. Are there any examples where an influencer or a brand has fired an influencer? And what are the consequences of that? What happens for their fans and things like that? So I'll stop there. And I guess, Thomas, if you want to go first.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So in this case, it doesn't look hopeful with 30 years of information systems having gone into place with a similar sort of, I guess, outcome in organizational settings. But despite that, there appear to be some projects ongoing in the UK and elsewhere, in Australia, specifically in the child welfare sectors, where administrators have realized that centrally designed technologies that focus on this sort of productivity, efficiency, economy approach aren't necessarily achieving the objectives that they were wanting. And so they're redesigning or restructuring technologies to align more closely with clinical practice at the social work level. And this is still in the works. It's unclear whether these will have the desired effects, but it's certainly a move more towards a technology that integrates another worldview and that tries to balance the needs of both people delivering frontline services as well as people who are trying to manage an organization.
And so,
thank you very much, Robin. And also, yeah, so to start, it's a very good question about datification. So what datification means and how I understand it is the process of turning, I don't know, interactions or social relations into data. So if you like, click, browse, view, that's something that can then be sorted and into machine readable bits and processes. What it can then be used for, and this is common practice, I think, in social media technologies and platforms, is then to use that to develop predictive algorithms, which can then be used to target, can be sold to, you know, third parties or advertisers, which can then target you based on a whole series of components, often ones which you don't necessarily reveal, but come out in the ways in which data can be then grouped. So for example, if I like curly fries, for example, and this has been used by Jennifer Goldblatt as an example of how it is that predictive analytics work. If other people like curly fries who have, you know, or who are highly intelligent, for example, that means that there's a commonality linked there. So, and that's very similar to collaborative filtering. It's like you develop audiences based on common likes, and that's a process that happens because those likes can be datified and made machine readable. So people get worked up about it because I think for two reasons in a very simplified way. One, when we use social media or dating sites, we do it because we're told that this is how we can connect. We don't do it because we're told that information, whether that's personal or private or just our information, you know, can be used to then sell things to us or manipulate us or for targeted advertising or campaigning, or for the development and growth of platforms. That's not what we're, you know, meant to be doing. That's not why it is that we're engaging. So that's one reason. The second reason is that that data can be used in quite harmful ways in some cases. You know, the Data Justice Lab, for example, keeps records of data harms where data has been used to either misidentify people or prevent them from being able to, in the cases of insurance or in the cases of financial records, has been able to prevent them from having certain privileges and certain rights. So and there's many, many examples of the misuse of data, I think, by social technology companies as well as by third parties. You know, Cambridge Analytica and that whole series of events around targeted campaigning, electoral campaigning, is another, you know, really prescient example of how datification can be used quite negatively. So hopefully that answers your question there.
Jillian.
Yes, absolutely. Simple answer, yes. There are loads of times when brands have fired influencers. I would say the most recent one would be with the college admissions scandal. Lori Loughlin, one of the woman from Full House, if anyone remembers that show, her daughter, Olivia Jade, is an influencer. And she'd actually been vlogging her experience at USC, incidentally saying how much she didn't like school. And it turns out we know how she got in, but she lost all of her partnerships. And it wasn't even just partnerships. She had branded content with Sephora. She had a lip palette. She had so much going on, and all of that was understandably taken from her. I think the biggest thing that brands, based on the research and the interviews I've conducted, is they want to work with the influencers so they can get their followers, but they're also extremely aware that it's risky, and they are genuinely handing often a legacy to, you know, a teenager who just happens to have, you know, a few million followers. So that they're willing to do it, but those who do it feel very strongly about their brand. That's the one thing at P&G. When I interviewed Paul Fox, who's our head of corporate communications, he said, we believe so strongly in our brand that we don't think an influencer is going to quote unquote mess it up. They said, we don't, you know, we believe and stand behind what we produce. that we're willing to take that risk. So I think it's only some brands who, have that permission or that privilege to do it. But definitely there are some who've sort of gone rogue and have lost partnerships as a result.
And just as a follow-up, I was thinking that's from the influencer's point of view. I'm thinking of the followers. Do you intend to take this research on and have a look at what the followers are thinking when, especially when you were focusing on the beauty products? I was thinking about the images of perfection, I suppose you could call it, that are often presented and often in a gendered way. Do you have any reflections on that side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're just starting a project right now looking at the consumer side. So this paper is more towards the producer side, but looking at fake AI influencers. So these women aren't even real. They're computer generated, but people genuinely think that they are valid depictions of beauty or of a very specific type of representation. So no, we're definitely looking at that. It's based on a piece we had in Feminist Media Studies that came out a couple of months ago. And we're just trying to look at that further, but more from the consumer perspective, because it's extremely damaging if you have a Lil Michaela, who's one of the robotic influencers, standing and professing elements of beauty when she actually is in fact not real.
And I suppose especially during pandemic times when people are relatively isolated and they aren't actually seeing anything other than the visual digital image out there of what they might look like or should look like. But thank you. And an observation from Colin Goad for Thomas. Colin is asking about feelings of alienation amongst the workers that might be induced by these automated systems that are being introduced. And you mentioned the formalization of work, but do you have any reflections on how those kinds of feelings can be avoided?
Well, this one is interesting because it speaks to, I'll break it into two phenomena. There were workers who had seen a previous system and who had worked in a different environment. And then there were newer workers who had only worked in a CPIN environment, and they had very different perspectives on this. I would say workers who had seen more and had more experience with other ways of working and doing the job felt very alienated because there was a rift and a change in how the work was done. I don't think that occurred to the same extent with newer workers. They may have felt unsettled about certain things, but not in the same way as some of the older workers. And as far as getting around that feeling of alienation, it's really engaging with workers, and these types of systems are often a foundation and they can be built upon or enhanced. And so making changes that make the system more comfortable for the workers is one way to do that, by responding to their needs and the tools that they need to do their jobs.
Okay, thank you.
I also noticed a question from Barbara Richards in the chat.
Go ahead.
And whether the system was considered successful. I would have liked to touch on that in the presentation, but because I was pressed for time, I wasn't. And yes, it's definitely an according to, and it's also sort of a balance. There are some things, I think the presentation itself focused on a lot of the negative aspects, but some of the successes, both for administrators and for social workers, were that for the administrators, they just wanted to get this system rolled out across the agencies. And in that sense, it was a success. This is the first time that there's been a centralized information system in the province of Ontario, despite calls since 1997. So in that sense, it's been a success. The other piece is that social workers, they felt fragmented between agencies, and the process for sharing information between social workers, where clients might be moving between one region and another that are right next door, it would be onerous, fax machines, phone calls, the possibility that certain documents could be missed. And now with the information system, it facilitates those things. But at the same time, there are still these problems of a specific emphasis on managerial objectives, the types of data that are in the system and the algorithms that are in use to identify and respond to client concerns. But those are all things that can be changed. So in one way, there's a foundation in place, and it's just a matter of reworking and negotiating what that foundation should look like.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else out there who is just dying to ask a question? If there is, speak up, raise your hand. One of the things you learn to do in Zoom land is to pause just long enough so people actually do have a chance to raise their hand. If not, then what I would like to do is to say thank you to our three speakers and to all of you who've attended. We've had quite a tour. We've gone from brand influencers to love and dating apps to inside the organizational change using new database technologies, which really affect people's lives in one way or another, because we're talking about children here. And in fact, that's the case in all three cases in this paper. It's not all about technology or something we call data. It's about human beings and how they live their lives in relation to our new technical systems. And you all raised fascinating points. Thank you enormously for your contributions. Thank you to those of you who did ask questions and to all of you who have attended, to Michelle for organizing and moderating. And let us hope that the CCSF finds it within itself and its resources to do more of these in the future. We do have one plan, in case you're wondering, to potentially host one in close to the global warming environment conference, probably in October, where we'll turn our minds and some of our scholars' minds to those kinds of issues. But we will also be holding another networking event for our students and for friends of CCSF and donors in midsummer, we're hoping. Thank you, and I'm going to close the meeting. And
Thank you.
take care of yourselves, everyone.
Take care. Bye.